All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on facilitation strategies for planetary scientists. We are so delighted to have all of you with us here today. Please feel free to continue introducing yourself in the chat. And while you're doing that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So post a little bit about your name, another cool fact about yourself. Let's go ahead and hear a little bit more about our team here. I'm so delighted to have our group here with us. So I'm Christine Shupla. I work for the Lunar and Planetary Institute, where I'm the Science Engagement Manager, and I've been helping to facilitate some of these webinars. I'm so glad you're all joining us again. With me, I have two marvelous people and great friends. Joëlle, would you mind saying just a couple words about yourself?
I'd be happy to. Thanks for that. Hello, everyone. My name is Joëlle LeMer. I am a director at the Center for STEM Teaching and Learning at Northern Arizona University in beautiful Flagstaff, Arizona. I have a lot of facilitation experience, but I also learn a lot from others too. And I definitely borrow things that I see that I like, that it seemed to be effective. But my background is both in anthropology and in STEM education. I actually really like the combination of both of those. I PI quite a bit of grant projects in my work here at the center, and one of them does happen to be a NASA planetary science and engineering curriculum for out of school time kids. And so that's enough for me for a while. I am happy to pass it over to my other panelists and have Ed introduce himself.
All right, thank you. So, saludos everyone. I'm Edgard Rivera-Valentín. I go by Ed. I'm a planetary radar scientist in Maryland. My research typically resides at the intersection of planetary defense, so protecting the world from asteroids, planetary exploration, so facilitating sending spacecraft out to planetary bodies, and astrobiology. Part of my work means that I also get to be on several NASA missions and larger teams. So I'm on NASA's Apophis Explorer, the Near Earth Object Surveyor mission, and the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, specifically the radar instruments that's on the LRO spacecraft. And another aspect of what I've gotten to do is actually get to work with both Christine and Joëlle in a really cool project through NASA Science Activation Program, which is where I, as a scientist, got to pick up on a lot of facilitation skills, not only by observing them do the amazing work that they do, but also being thrown in the middle of it and getting to practice with those skills and refine those skills. And part of that experience has taught me how transferable facilitation skills are to working in large teams like a NASA mission. And so part of what I will be throughout this talk, or interjecting what Joëlle says, will be like those tangible examples of how some of those techniques that Joelle's going to example out get to be applied to when you're working in large teams.
Thank you so much, Ed. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this. Why facilitation strategies? So planetary scientists and astrobiologists are usually working together in teams, groups of people, whether it's on a mission or a research project. Whatever the case is, a lot of scientists work in teams. And to work together, we have to hold meetings, hold workshops, hold events, and find ways to work together. Facilitation strategies can help us to have better teamwork, basically. It improves that group dynamic, the way people are working together and planning and communicating. And so learning and using these different facilitation strategies can help individuals both in organizing their teams and in leading their teams, and all of us as members of teams, thinking about how we can work better together with others. So this webinar is just an introduction. You can't cover all of facilitation strategies in an hour, but we're going to share a few strategies on how to facilitate collaborative working groups. So that's going to be our focus for this one. And your questions are welcome throughout. Please feel free to enter them in the chat. Let's begin with that. So we've got a chat question for all of you. And that is, we'd like to hear a little bit about a challenge that you might have experienced in a team meeting. What's something that you might have experienced in a team meeting? Maybe we'll find a way that facilitation could help with that. Feel free to go ahead and start typing your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you think, because working together can be challenging. People are thinking. Does facilitation include mental health and mental well-being? And does a person-centric facilitation include this approach? So, Joëlle, I will let you think about that and feel free to start sharing. And then, so Mel pointed out, so in a team meeting, sometimes not everyone's on the same page. People are thinking about different things. They don't all, they're not even coming at the same problem. They might be thinking about different problems. And Jen mentioned one person might disagree strongly with the group, and that person will feel left out when consensus goes in a completely different direction. That's another problem, absolutely. If you're the only person in that meeting doing what you do, like if you're the only planetary scientist, there might be a jargon barrier. People might be speaking different languages in many different ways. The most complexes work at different times. So if you're working with people virtually, maybe even, and they're in different time zones, that's a problem. These are great issues. Thank you so much. And somebody's posted a question as well about keeping everyone engaged. So trying to get that team meeting, getting everybody on top of things, getting them to share their opinions. Time zones, communication barriers. Absolutely. Sometimes you might be meeting with people and you're in a completely different time zone. It might be the middle of the night. So awesome. Great ideas, great challenges. And so with that, let's go ahead. And Joëlle, please talk to us a little bit more about these collaborative working groups.
Thank you. And I also want to thank everybody in the chat. I will consider some of these elements and questions that were written as we go through. And if I forget, we'll maybe have some time as we are going through some of the information that we have that you can re-ask those questions. But first of all, I want to just think about some ideas about facilitation. For some people think facilitation is nothing but a, touchy-feely group therapy kind of thing where we do icebreakers and, have to do that. And some people love it and some people hate it. But that's not what facilitation is. It's really being intentional about how you lead or co-lead or collaboratively lead a group. And so a lot of things that the challenges that you're facing in the chat can be done with intentional facilitation. And we're going to help you think through some of those, at least get you started. And Christine had emailed out some resources earlier. We have some at the end of our slides. So hopefully some of those resources will also help you too. And facilitation is not necessarily easy, but it can be. And it can also be a lot of fun. I have a great time facilitating. And it also is not just for educational settings. So I think having a great facilitated meeting makes all the difference in the world. But before we get into some of our strategies, I wanted to really do a couple of foundational constructs that I think might be really important to help us frame the thinking. And framing is a very critical facilitation move. So this foundational construct that we put in here for collaborative group work, oftentimes it could be a meeting, it could be a project, it could be a mission, whatever. You've got this dynamic tension between your task and your goal or your mission, the processes that you use in order to be able to accomplish that goal, and the group development itself. And a lot of people leave out that group development, but it's people who do the work. I mean, we have AI, yeah. But The people themselves are who does the work, and it's very much outcomes driven. When you do your tasks and your goal, and some people are just like all about that, and some people need a little bit more structure and help. But groups don't just automatically get together and do the work. They really have to be led through that. And some of that are the infrastructure things that you put in place, and some of them are the strategies. And we're going to go through those a little bit in our conversation today. So Christine, the next slide, another foundational construct is really thinking about stages of team development. Now, this may or may not be new to some of you. This idea has been around since Tuckman put it together, I think in the 1960s. It's been around for a very long time. But as we said, groups don't just, or individual peoples don't just form a group. You really have to be intentional about recognizing where you are. But if you are focused on a particular task or mission or whatnot, you have these various different stages. They are iterative. It is not a linear kind of stage. And so knowing where your group might be and where you might need to kind of backtrack or do some other kinds of things is important in terms of leading or facilitating the group. And so let me just tell you a little bit about each of those, and I'm going to be very brief about this because you can look it up. There's tons of resources about stages of team development. In the forming stage, people are so excited. It's like, yay, it's new. We're going to get going. We're going to do all this stuff. And the idea there is that you need to have a lot of structures in place beginning with this, that you may not end with those structures, but you do have to facilitate with some ideas in mind, like some decision making, some ways for norms to be set up. But once you start getting work in and start doing the work, it can get messy. And that's when people start storming. They might argue with one another. Somebody mentioned in the meetings, that there are disagreements. Yes, absolutely. This is all normal. And having tools or having the disposition to think about ways in which to move the group forward or to figure out what they might need as they're storming is important. So conflict resolution, problem solving kinds of techniques are really critical there. In terms of norming, you've got a pretty cohesive group, and this is often when leadership becomes shared. Like you don't have to do everything. You can share the love, if you will. In performing, there is, things are just kind of humming along, and it may seem like you're not facilitating, but this is a really critical stage for reflection, for dialogue, for feedback, for thinking about how new people might be brought into a very well-oiled machine, if you will, and things are humming along. So there can be challenges in that. And then finally, adjourning. And in group development, sometimes people handle this very differently. They may be like, woohoo, yay, I'm out. But there are times to celebrate, to grieve, but importantly, as a facilitator, giving people an opportunity to reflect and evaluate various different aspects will help in the next round of when you approach a particular task again. So those are some foundational constructs that we wanted to just present to set the stage, if you will, for why we facilitate group development in particular ways. So this is kind of the ideas that we have moving forward. So in our strategies for success, which is the next slide.
Oh, wait, can I interject?
Oh, please, please, please. I'm so sorry.
So, as a scientist, something that I really like about this framework is I'm used to equations. I'm used to thinking things of step one, step two, step three. And you don't, when you are in a mission team or when you are put into management, you're not given that type of like, here's the equation of how you end up working collaboratively in a group. But this type of framework ends up giving us basically that equation of expect forming, expect storming, expect norming. And this is how we move along these different steps and facilitate the growth of your team. And so, although like Joëlle did an amazing job of defining all of these, the fact that now you have this framework, you know the name of the person, Tuckman, who had put this together, you have these words, you can go out and Google and learn even deeper about this and then be able to apply this own framework when you're working in a team.
Thanks, Ed. So the kinds of things that we're going to talk about here, we've got 6 topics, if you will, and we'll briefly go through some of these. And the facilitator initial moves, thinking about that forming stage, is really where we're at with that. Intentionally including everyone. Someone asked about mental health. This is things that you might need to think about in terms of what are the needs of the individual needs of the group. And so you may want to consider that. Making thinking visible is a very important, but you may not think about it in that way. Strategy for moving the group's work forward. And then there's some simple group interaction strategies that we want to highlight. We're only going to share a couple things here and there because, again, as Christine mentioned, we can't do everything in a 1-hour seminar, but as an introduction, we just thought that these are some important ideas to help you think through some of this, and we can follow up on that. There are logistical structures that need to happen. Again, things don't just happen. You need to create structures in order for good facilitation to happen. And oftentimes it's that pre-thought and that pre-work that makes it a success. And then, of course, everyone is always worried about, okay, so how do we troubleshoot some of these challenges? So we're going to move through some of that a little bit. Thanks for whoever did some clapping. I hope that we're on the right track. So let's get started with our first strategy, and that is some facilitator moves. Okay, so here we are. We've got a new group that is forming, and we are just thinking about what are some things as a facilitator I need to think about. The clarity of the goal is really important as a facilitator. If you don't know, and I simply put it as the what, why, how of what you're doing, and really important is understanding why. Why is this important? Why is this research that we're doing? How is that going to add some value? What is it that we want to learn, and what are we going to do with that? And so that's the why part, if you will. The what is, here's our task at hand, here's our mission, here's our goal, and how are the processes. So you need to be clear on what it is that you're going to be trying to accomplish so that you can actually communicate that with others. And sometimes that takes a little bit of thought to distill that down into something that can be easily communicated to a team and that where they can get on board. Because if people don't buy into the why, you're not going to get what you need out of any kind of either meeting, facilitation, group work, that kind of thing. And then the framing part, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we get to logistical structures, but really thinking through what's a roadmap for collaboration. How am I going to do this group development? How are we going to balance that triangle of our task, our process, and our group development? And really thinking through an initial roadmap. And so when I lead teams through projects, for example, I think about some of those things. Now, they always change. It's not going to be a static thing, but it does help to pre-think some of those elements as you are doing that dynamic interaction between task, process, and group development. And then and we're going to try to give you some hip pocket tools for some skills that you may want to do to honor contributions in the group, to manage group member input. And an example of some of that may be that, and I certainly can't read the room here, but that's why I said, yay for the clap, to read some of the group's energies. How you participate in the chat may give us, for example, some feedback on what the energy level is in your participation. And if you have high energy levels and participation, great, we can get some stuff done and people are willing to, do a process that will help us get to the goal. If that process doesn't match with the goal, then you've got that, there's a mismatch in your framework. But so reading that energy, knowing how to get groups moving forward is important, and particularly on the flip side, if there's low energy or people haven't bought in, you need to think about why that is occurring and have some skills. And it may be that at some point in time, you might just have to go, stop, and then we'll move on. Anyway, and then always encourage reflection for yourself, for your team members, and all of those to be able to stay focused on what we need to do.
And so the ed interjection here is, um, so I think as folks who work in STEM, a lot of the times we are um, pushed away from empathy, but facilitation really leans into empathy. And I'm going to highlight that third point of reading the energy in the group, being able to, as you're facilitating conversations, as you're moving towards a goal, being able to go, okay, it seems like maybe I have a group over here and they're talking and they're almost getting to being able to resolve this issue. But I said that at exactly 3:50 p.m. Eastern time, we were going to stop. What do I do? Do I stop or do I let them talk? I let them talk because I'm reading the energy in the group, seeing that actually there's still motion going on. There's still important stuff that needs to happen. But part of reading the energy is also honoring the group. And so one of the things I personally take is that I honor my start time. We're starting at 9 a.m. and I honor my end time. We're ending this at 5 p.m. and not 5:01. We are ending because Ed wants to go home and hug a dog. So that's important. But it's important for other folks in the room. But that just means, like, personally, when I'm putting together like meeting schedules, conference schedules, I build in flexes time across it because I know at one point the conversation needs to go a little bit longer. That might eat into the flex time. Some conversations are shorter. That might balance things out. But I intentionally build in that space so that I have the flexibility to read the energy, abide by what the group needs, while still honoring my start and end times.
So I've got a question for all of you at this point. What other factors do you think about when you're thinking about starting work with a new group? You're joining a new class, a new team, a new project. Um, it's just beginning. What other factors are important for you when you're thinking about getting a group started? Please go ahead and enter them in the chat. One facilitator move is called wait time, giving people at least 5 seconds to think about what they want to say. Um, Empathy and adding, building friendships, breaking the ice, getting to know each other. Absolutely. And I hear, this sort of idea of equality, making sure that everyone is equally welcomed. Um, Everyone's level of experience in the project, thinking about what their background is, what their area of specialty is, and how you're valuing them for that and recognizing that. Having a group think and open discussion approaches, also asking the right questions. Those are wonderful, wonderful points. Thank you all. So some of these ideas for how to get people going, thinking about what types of people you're working with and how passionate they are about what they're doing and taking all of that into account. Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes when people are very passionate, it's hard to stay on time, right? Um, so being clear in what your expectation is, what the timeline is, what, you know, the goals, all of those are really, really important. Absolutely. So being clear in your communications and planning for all of these things. Thinking about how people prefer to express themselves. Some very strongly, others are more introverted, and how to balance that out. And we'll be getting to that. So excellent points, folks. You are welcome to continue to add things. We're going to move on to the next strategy. Joëlle.
Well, I love that this was such a nice segue because it seems like all of the comments there in the chat are focused in on the group development piece. And that, again, as I said, it's people who do the work. So really thinking about how to include everyone. And yes, we do have, I love that someone had written different levels of expertise, that there may be some difference in kind of like power and knowledge in the group, depending on how much you know, how much experience you have, and others may be just learning and really taking into consideration how that group dynamic is. So that if you want to help mentor someone, for example, within a group, you might intentionally pair them with someone who does have more knowledge and that kind of thing. But recognizing that balance and power and how that affects group dynamics, because if the intention for the group is for the group to collaborate with one another, then always having someone who thinks that they have the final say, or they are, wielding some power around, you might need to be thinking about how that might work. And redirection is a very important piece, or mentoring, like, hey, I know that you are really knowledgeable about X, Y, or Z. Would you mind helping out, someone like Joëlle who doesn't know that as much about that as you do? So really thinking about that how you arrange the group or get the group to interact with one another based on that balance of power. How you arrange the physical space or the remote space is really important. If you have someone, and Ed and Christine know this when I teach workshops, I often, when we introduce ourselves or when we are talking about things, I'm sitting at a table with people. I don't want to seem like the expert in the room just because I'm facilitating something, because I'm absolutely not. I learn from people all the time. But I think being intentional about how you present yourself and how the space is arranged, even if it's remotely. And this is part of the reason why we have chat, just to be, absolutely transparent, is that we really want an interactive type of work here. And so being thoughtful about how you arrange even remote types of things is important. And then also our norms and expectations for one another. As Ed mentioned, beginning and ending on time, that's a norm. And people can expect it. If they expect, like, oh gosh, I got to go to this meeting and they always run 40 minutes over, I can't do it today. So there may be some norms that together collectively as a group you might develop together so that you can hold each other accountable for that. And as a facilitator, you need to help make sure that people are accountable for that by reflecting on how did we do with our norms? It doesn't have to happen every time. And really, that's too old to happen, do it every time. But, every now and then, check in with those norms. Do we need to add more? How are people feeling about that? And all of that creates this safe space to share ideas and also to share needs. I'm going to go back to that mental health or neurodiversity or other kinds of things. We have a lot of different kinds of team members, people who might be ADHD and can't sit for 2 hours or 5 days in a NASA meeting. That we all need to give each other some grace and some space, but to be able to create that safety net so that people can share their ideas in ways that are helpful and contribute to, again, that end goal that you have for your meeting.
And the Ed interjection here is, so I want to go back to the third bullet point here, norms and expectations, and specifically tug on a thread from earlier in the chat about jargon. So for folks who may have the privilege of getting to work on a NASA mission, NASA is big on its TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. And even between mission teams, I'm on 3, the same 3 letters will mean completely and utterly different things. And if you don't start off the meeting with a good, here's our acronyms, and then maybe even during your meeting, don't use them, use the word, you can exclude folks from the conversation. And I'll give my own personal anecdote where I had just joined a certain mission team. And at the first meeting, at the end of it, I was like, should I be here? Do I belong? I feel like a complete imposter here because of all of the TLAs that were happening. I was just not understanding anything what was happening. And for a while there, I was completely second guessing my role on this team. And so that's the effect of language on how we can include people in teams. And the change is, instead of just saying TLA, I would say 3-letter acronyms. That change adds 2 seconds, maybe even 1. And that one tiny change makes sure that you're including everybody in the group. So if you are mission teams, that's my own suggestion as I experienced it. Let's be intentional with our wording. That way everybody feels like they belong.
And Ed, I don't know if you noticed in the chat, it's also being careful with slang and sarcasm, because not everyone shares the same sense of humor. And thank you for those of you who are here not from the US and English may not be your primary language. That lost in translation is real. And I think that really helps if we are intentional about how we communicate with one another. I also appreciate that there's some vulnerability in the chat in terms of like imposter syndrome and what the expectations are. If you have knowledge up here or here, how you're supposed to get there, and if you're supposed to get there like, yesterday, or if there are structures in place to help do that. And I think there's no one correct answer for that. It really is how you pay attention to that group development and group dynamic in your teams. And trust me, because of the stages of team development, people will get there. Sometimes we forget that it takes some time to do that.
Thank you, Joëlle and Ed. I also appreciate the point about needing and giving guidance and support. So graciously accepting it, even when you don't really need it sometimes, but also looking around and seeing who you could support, who's new, who might be suffering from imposter syndrome and might need a little bit of support, somebody who's more experienced and can or feels very confident in their role can help those who might be learning, because we're all learning, and give opportunities for those people who are learning to share what they're learning, because it might be new to some of the rest of us. So great points. We're going to take a few seconds here just for personal reflection, because something Joëlle said earlier was how it's important to take time to think and process what we're learning about everything, right? When you're in a teamwork. So I want you to think. You don't need to answer in the chat or anything, but just think for a few seconds. Was there a time where you felt like you didn't belong in a meeting, and what would have helped? So we'll give you a little bit of time here to think about that. And we tend to be a little uncomfortable with silences, so I'm not going to sit in silence here for a whole minute. But I'm going to let you think about that. Think about what would have helped. Think about how you can do that for someone else in a meeting, how you can facilitate that and let that person feel like they belong. So. Joëlle, Ed, anything else to add before we move along?
No. I said no, and then of course I thought of something.
Please.
I know. I just want to stress the importance of reflection. And that gives our brain, and the brain science is there. It gives our brain a chance to just pause and consider our own actions, actions of others, how we are presenting ourselves, how we interact. And so thank you for taking that time for your own personal reflection.
Thanks, Joëlle. Okay, folks, we're going to move along to the next strategy. And by the way, this is being recorded, so you are always welcome to go back and rewatch it as well. Joëlle, making thinking visible.
All right, let me just start off with this one with a bit of a rationale for why I think that this is really important. So as we've mentioned multiple times, individuals make up a group. And so if you want to be inclusive, you want to make sure that everyone's ideas are honored and that they have the opportunity to contribute. And so we'll get into some strategies for what that might look like in the next slide or two. But making thinking visible is important in many ways because it does honor that individual contribution. It documents sometimes the processes and the decisions and the ideas that are there, but also sometimes that I'm still thinking. I can at times, just what I just modeled like 2 seconds ago. No, I don't have anything to add for reflection. Oh, but wait, if you give me 10 seconds, I do. But if you have ideas that are presented and posted up either in a physical space or in a remote space, it gives people a chance to consider what other people are saying, and some people are more quick about it than others. And it then allows them to have some time to contribute. So again, that bringing in everyone's ideas inclusively is good to encourage group understanding, listening deeply to others, and it also then becomes a visual reference that you could return to. You can refine the ideas. Sometimes we've drawn like diagrams and like fixed them, and like these arrows aren't right. We've got to fix this. And it also allows for more reflection too. Um, the other thing that I like about the making thinking visible is that it helps the group stay focused on one topic and one process at a time. And so, you know how sometimes there are definite times for divergence, and then there are times for convergence. And so and I think you can make thinking visible in both of those situations, whether or not you're in a brainstorming mode or whether or not you're really trying to think through something. But making that thinking visible really helps the group thought with that. And then as you facilitate that, sometimes you do need to step back and maybe ask some open-ended questions like, how does that idea connect to this one? Is that something that we should put here, or is that another idea that belongs somewhere else? So that you can really begin to help the group stay focused on this. So a couple of strategies for that is, you know, I'm a big fan of chart paper, especially those kind that just stick on the walls. So you could write things down on chart paper. As the image on the screen shows, there's lots of Post-its. There are different ways to do Post-its, and you can do Post-its virtually too. Virtually, there's slides. You can have, you know, team breakout pieces and have everybody record their ideas in slides or drawings or whatever. And then another effective one that we have found is running meeting notes, because some people may take notes and then it's like, where did we put the notes for the last one? So that's just an idea. It's not the idea, but it is an idea. So those are just a couple of strategies. The bigger idea is to make those thoughts visible and accessible, is what we should have put in there as well, to the group.
And the ed interjection here is, I should just record myself doing that. That would make this fun. So the interjection here is, I'm going to give an example of one of the techniques that make thinking tangible, visible. But at the same time, it also meets actually one of the points from the previous slide about acknowledging power dynamics. So earlier this year, I was actually facilitating conversations for a mission team, specifically two different instrument teams on that mission. And the goal of those conversations, going back to Joelle's first slides, make sure you have your goal in mind. The goal of those conversations were we were going to find new ways that the two instrument teams can collaborate to do cool new science. So how do we facilitate those conversations? Well, the first thing I said is we had sticky notes. So Post-its, we handed it out to everybody. I said everybody gets to put down 3 ideas, 3 research topics that they would want to do over the next couple of years. We did quiet contemplation. That means, okay, you have your sticky notes. Don't talk to the person next to you, on the side of you, in front of you, behind you. You are by yourself writing something on these sticky notes. Then we put all of the sticky notes up on the whiteboard. Once you were ready, everything went up. And then folks got an opportunity to go up to the whiteboard and put plus ups. So that's where everyone they got 3 pluses that they could use, and they went up and were like, oh, I really resonate with this idea. I really resonate with this idea. And then we looked at the top 3 ideas just given the votes. Why does this work? 1, let's go back to the idea of power dynamics. A lot of the time in mission teams, in collaborative working groups, there's going to be that one person who is extroverted, who can be very loud, and who will dominate the conversation. So the ideas that the group ends up working on is that person's ideas. But we all have ideas. Some of us are introverted. So how do we facilitate those folks who operate differently in social settings? Well, you give them the opportunity for quiet contemplation and the opportunity to be able to work, put it up, and not feel like the spotlight is on them. you also provide the opportunity that everybody's ideas are up there. At the end of the day, we took pictures of all of the notes that were up there. We discussed the top 3 or top 4 in detail, but everybody's ideas were up there. Nobody's ideas were lost. Some of those ideas that may not have gotten upvoted, they were still part of the meeting notes, and there's still actions that we ended up going back as we held different conversations. We were actually, wait, that one idea may have not gotten that vote, but actually that like works better over here in this other conversation over here. I'd upvote it more, right? So all ideas get to be actually discussed and get part of all of this. So that's one strategy technique that you can leverage. Go from quiet contemplation individual, plus ups after you put the notes up, and then discuss those top threes and facilitate those conversations through it. Back to you.
Thank you, Ed.
Can I just interject one more thing before you move on, Christine? Sorry, Ed sparks me, and then Camilla in the chat talked about data analysis, and I think that is a really important specific example, and that's why I wanted to come back to this. And it is important to make that visible as well. There's a great process that I use quite often called data-driven dialogue. You can look that up. And so it really helps folks look through data that you're going to analyze or some other thing. You don't have to necessarily, do it in one particular way. But one of the tenets of this kind of data-driven dialogue is to make the data visible, make your ideas, make your interpretation of what it is that you think is going on visible for the group so that they can react. So I just wanted to interject that one piece.
Thank you. And thank you, Camilla, for your input. Let's go ahead and get everyone's at this point. So we invite everyone to think about what techniques you could recommend to capture a group's ideas. What ideas do you have? Please enter them in the chat. We'd love to hear them. And it's going to take a little bit of time for people to think and to type. And while people are thinking and typing, one of the things that we've been doing as a team is not only keeping running notes online, but like Camilla said, opportunities for everybody to go in and add and edit those notes so that way we can build on it. A thinking tree with different branches for people's ideas. I love that. Love that.
Bridget, I may have to borrow that. See, I told you I'd learn from other people. I've never done that. That sounds really fun.
We've also used it as a decision tree where you have ideas and then, oh, these come together. This is a decision made. You lock it in and you keep putting all of this through. Yeah. Tree thinking. I love it.
Brainstorming. Thank you so much, Jason. Writing down ideas, but recording verbal communications as well. Trying to capture all of those and brainstorming, capturing them in writing, capturing the verbal, what people are saying, and getting all of that together. And that's one. That's a 5-second wait time. We'll go ahead and move along, but if you have other ideas, please feel free to continue entering them into the chat. So Joëlle, tell us a little bit about some of these group interaction strategies.
Oh my gosh, there are so many strategies. We gave you a couple of websites to look through some of these things. We just picked a couple that look at individual, like, or small group, one-on-one, and then large group ones. So again, we can't do everything in this webinar, but we thought we'd give you a couple of strategies that you may or may not be familiar with already. And so the first one is a think, pair, share. And as Ed pointed out earlier, giving people time to think and contemplate. Many people are very quick in, having a question, thinking about it, being able to respond. Others are not. I'm in that not category. I need to think about it a little bit. It depends on the topic, actually. I can sometimes be quicker, but doing this idea of posing a question or a problem to solve or some situation, giving people a chance to think, and again, even virtually, this is important. We tend to just move on and fill the space, but thinking is a really important piece. Then having that opportunity to pair up with somebody or even in a small group and give the time to share. And sometimes some people are more verbose, like myself, than others. So that is a really incredible strategy. A lot of professors at the university here use that. There are just so many different powerful ways to use that. Another one is in that when you pair and share a particular strategy, because some people hog airtime in a big way, partner A, B talk moves. So partner A may talk, give them a time. You get 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 5, depending on the topic. And I share. Partner B does not speak, listens. Sometimes people listen to think about, oh, here's how I'm going to respond to that. The idea is you just want to really listen to somebody, and then you switch. Then partner B talks, and that partner A listens. Then you give some time for that dialogue to happen. You are not responding to that until both parties have had a chance to share. And that's a really powerful way to have people feel heard. And then moving to the group ideas, we've talked about brainstorming, but there are rules for brainstorming. And again, making that thinking visible, the different strategies that you can do for brainstorming in terms of, as a facilitator, it's hard sometimes not to comment like, I don't think that fits. Hold off on that. But as a facilitator, all ideas are important. People can ask questions. We want to record this. We want to show this. And there should be a point to brainstorming, not just like, let's brainstorm all the possibilities. Focus that brainstorming. So that focused brainstorming as a facilitator is really valuable. And then, of course, there's the consensus. And consensus does not mean everyone has to agree. It does mean everyone has to live with the decision. So that these ideas here, there's a lot of things to uncover beneath that, but there are strategies, there should be strategies in place for how decisions are made. Consensus is one strategy, but it comes with a lot of other things that may be involved. And there are processes and lots of different tools and strategies out there, and some of which are in the resources that we gave you for how to help the groups build consensus and to narrow that down. And Ed gave a great example even too about those top 3 ideas that people had come up with.
But the Ed interjection for this one is, so actually I have 2 interjections. The original idea I had, but then obviously Joëlle had to say something that instigated my brain. So Joëlle was talking about like ways of listening, and typically when we listen with the intent of response. And one way that I have personally learned to adapt my own response is active listening, where you listen with the intent to summarize what the person just said. And if you're doing that, then you are more receptive to what is coming at you, because you have to be able to turn around and say, what I heard you say was. And I always start with that phrase, because then that phrase sticks in my head and it reminds me that I need to be listening to the words so I can summarize. As someone who has ADHD, it is definitely a technique that I constantly use to mask my own brain's innate ability to go off into spirals. So that's something, active listening and reminding yourself what I heard you say is. But the strategy example I wanted to go on here is about consensus building. So sometime last year, I was facilitating a different project. In this one, we were working on a mission concept and we were building up the science goals and objectives. And so the way we wanted to do that was by building consensus on what should be motivating this mission. And so what we did is we took the group and we divided it into 4 smaller groups. Each one had a note taker and a facilitator. And then we started each of those smaller groups with a think, pair, share. folks came together, they discussed. Each of the small groups were science themed. So like you had geology, biology, whatever. There was that thing pair shared, then they reported out, the note taker wrote everything, the smaller group discussed. There was at least two key findings that came out of it. The conversations were motivated by prompts and a tangible output that each one of had to come out with. So they had to answer a specific question. And then we came together and divided those four groups down to two groups, discussed the next branch of that, had rinse and repeated until we were able to come up with now we have built consensus upon by working and walking our way through this pyramid as to what we should be working on this mission. And so it helps to not allow dominant voices. This is just because it's a PI-led mission doesn't mean the PI knows what they're doing. So this is a good way of making sure that we are incorporating new ideas. We're actually working towards innovation, and it balances out the level playing field. And you're also intentionally giving folks in your community example of, hey, we built this consensus. We all agreed in these different steps, and there won't be this misconception that well, you just went with that person's idea because you like them better than me. We came together with this, and so that's one example of how I personally have gone about it. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Ed. So we're going to give just a few seconds here, not too long, for some personal reflection. We shared some different ideas about different ways to build group interaction and strategies. And some of them might be things that you love. Some of them might be things, oh, I don't want to do that. Don't put me alone with a person to talk to because I don't want to do that, or whatever it is. Think about what works for you, what works for the rest of your team, and apply that. Take that into consideration as well. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to think here. Not too much time. We're running out of time. And when you're applying that, you'll have to think a little bit about the logistical structures. Joëlle?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to that task process group development triangle that I put together as the foundational construct. And so these logistical structures are part of that process. So again, we're just putting these things up here. I'm not going to go through each one of these because we've touched on some of these throughout our presentation. And so I just want to make sure to reiterate that process does involve these logistical structures, whether or not you're setting up how you're going to take meeting notes, how are you going to make the decisions, what kind of timelines you're going to follow. All of those things are important processes that you may not think is a facilitation move, but they absolutely are. And when you think about the logistical structures for this, it does make facilitation easier to have those in place.
The interjection here is, remember that like first slide-ish or so that Joëlle talked about Tuckman's cycle, forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, performing. Every one of these teams will perform differently. They will have different norms. Making the assumption that when you are bringing new people into your team that they know our communication norms. Everybody uses Slack. No, they don't. Some people use Teams, cry tears, cry tears. Some people use something else. So making sure that you have onboarding material, making sure that like you revisit these norms at least on a yearly basis, making sure that they're working for everybody is an important process of this cycle. That way we're including everybody and we're not leaving folks behind.
Thank you, Ed. So finding ways to share it on that. So for all of you, we'll take just a few seconds here to think about this, and you're welcome to enter your thoughts in the chat. What logistical strategies do you use? Thank you, Jen. So Teams versus Slack versus for some people who don't really, who are more productive with face-to-face communication. That's something else to consider to plan on when you're planning your logistics. Anybody else have anything to add? we want to make sure we've got plenty of time to talk about this next one because the next one's really important. Joëlle?
Okay, so addressing challenges actually we kind of put this last. A lot of people want to kind of jump right into this, but again, as I said before, really knowing the processes, the purpose of what you're doing, and knowing what your goal is, and having structures and good facilitation, hip pocket kinds of toolkits in place will help you address these challenges. I'm going to go through each of these just a little bit differently, but again, there are many other ways to help address some of these. Ed mentioned something a little bit earlier about knowing what the purpose of the conversation is. If you know the purpose of the conversation is, I need to intently listen to this other person and to then say, what I understand you saying is blah, blah, blah. That's good. But there are other purposes for conversation. A big distinctive difference is between a dialogue and a discussion. And a lot of times people will say, let's discuss this, when in fact you're actually having a dialogue. The purpose of a dialogue is to understand. That is, I can't remember what the root of that is. I'm sure it's a Greek word, but to speak and to listen with understanding. When you're in a discussion mode, the purpose of that is to make a decision. And so I think as a facilitator, having in your head, being clear what the purpose of that conversation is and what you're asking the group to do is really important. If you do this, it will help address a lot of those challenges. We've talked a little bit about dominant voices, and sometimes you just have the saboteur in there. It's like the heckler of the group. And there are particular strategies, facilitation strategies. Oh, thank you, Ed, for putting that in the chat. There are particular strategies that you can use when someone just really needs to derail the conversation for one reason or another. It's usually some personal agenda. You can acknowledge, and then move on, redirect. There are ways to, if you're physically in the room, go stand by them and go, thank you, Joëlle. I appreciate your thing. Christine, do you have anything to add to that so that you can redirect from intentionally calling on someone else and have airtime? Another way might be just to say, hey, you know what? I think you have some really good ideas about this. We're going to move on to this topic right now, but let's have this conversation and make sure you go back to that conversation with that person to hear them out and so it doesn't have to happen in the group. Those are just a couple of examples. Throughout all of the facilitation, you have to realize that you have to monitor yourself. When you and I have, been doing this a long time, but if I brief them up here, I just really don't have a lot of credibility and, I'm getting really excited about something. Whereas if I speak from my diaphragm, if I am calmer, if I match maybe some energies and I know what tone of voice to use, or if I'm like, wow, I can tell you're really excited by this. I'm okay to get excited by this, but I am monitoring how I am reacting with others. And the last one I wanted to point out is this third point focus. It's not about the person, it's about the idea. And so when you take the person out of the equation, even though we've talked about group development, their ideas, it's not Joëlle's idea. It is the idea about addressing challenges in facilitation is blah. Anyone else have something to add to that? So that's the idea of the third point focus. And again, prepping is the most important piece. And I went a little long. Sorry, Ed.
The Ed interjection here is I'll give two very quick ones. I want to give a tangible example about how to redirect conversation. So Joelle was like, if something's happening here, how do you make sure that you stay on topic? Parking lots. Parking lots are so useful. You have like a whiteboard or something with sticky notes and you tell people, that's a great idea. It's a little bit off topic. Can you write it on the post-it note and put it up on the parking lot? That makes sure that we can keep the conversation going. And then I'll also mention an important part of monitoring yourself. As a facilitator, the team is putting trust on you. And so you have to make sure that you're not breaking that trust. And so some of the things that I keep in mind when I've been facilitating conversations about how do we develop a mission goal or whatnot. Like I might have like a horse in the race. So I might have like a goal I really like. But as I'm facilitating those conversations, I am going with what the consensus is. So a way that I intentionally demonstrate that I'm not manipulating the conversation to get to the goal that I want is that I will say, now we're going to vote. As a facilitator, I am not voting on this. I am stepping outside because that's how I build that trust with you. That way you understand that I am not abiding by my own conflict of interest here. Back to you.
Thank
Well, I
you.
think it's to you, Ed. You get to wrap us up.
Oh, it
Yeah.
is?
So the
Darn.
next one, this wasn't easy, right? We just threw a whole lot of stuff at the wall, a whole lot of stuff. Ed, do you think everybody's going to catch it immediately?
No, no, not at all. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, I was part of this awesome NASA Science Activation team where I got to observe Christine, Joel, and others be facilitators in the group. I got to hear them talk about like the brain science and the back of the pocket techniques. And we held a bunch of different workshops where I got to practice some of those. Practice makes perfect. I know a lot of the times as scientists we feel like no, when we're going into this, like we need to like there's no failure, right? There is. Failure is how we learn. We are humans. We learn when we tripped over. Um, the thing is to pick yourself back up. And the real thing is to allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to be put into these positions where you get to practice these techniques. So just understand that you will be awesome eventually. No one is awesome at the beginning. But there are a bunch of resources that you're going to be provided with, but also like now that you've heard some of these key terms, right? The Tuckman cycle and the aspects of it, and you'll be able to rewatch this on YouTube. You know what else you can go on YouTube? Facilitator strategies for how to be a good facilitator. Put that in YouTube. There's some really good videos about that. So just search around, learn, observe others. You'll eventually be awesome.
Thank you so much. So I put some of the links in the chat, but here they are on the screen as well for everyone to see. I have a very quick poll that I'm going to launch, but it's also going to show up uh, as a link in the post when you leave. So if you don't have time for it now, please feel free to go ahead. This is anonymous. Your responses are anonymous. We just love to hear feedback and reflection. Feedback and reflection are so critical to everything we do because otherwise we don't know where we've been. We don't know where we're going. So here's some links. They're in the chat. We hope that you check these out. They'll also be in a follow-up email that you'll receive. And please see the recording on the website afterwards. We're so glad all of you joined us today and appreciate your time and your contributions and the thoughts that you have shared in the chat. Joëlle, Ed, what other final thoughts do you want to say?
I want to say thank you and good luck in all your endeavors.
May you live long and prosper.
Awesome. Awesome.